Hey, everybody. Before we get into the Queen Charlotte recap, if you need a Bridgerton recap, I've got you covered. Just hit the tab in the upper right hand corner so you know everything that's going on. Now, Queen Charlotte kicks off in Germany, which is where Charlotte is from. She's not a queen yet, though. She has been betrothed to King George, and she's not happy about it. Her brother Adolphus, though, signs the papers, and reluctantly, Charlotte has to go along with him to London. And she's pissed off. She's 17 years old. She didn't have a say in this thing. She doesn't know this guy. She doesn't know anything about George. She feels like she should have some say. She definitely feels like Adolphus should kind of have her back. While they're in the carriage arguing about this and she's throwing a little bit of a temper tantrum, Adolphus finally gets sick of it and says, "Look, I didn't have a choice. The largest country in the world came calling for you. So what was I supposed to do? Say no? Possibly start a war? No, I had to. And the reason might not be good. I realize that nobody like us has ever married someone of royalty before, but when they came calling, I couldn't risk creating an enemy of the British Empire." And what Adolphus is referring to is the fact that he, along with Charlotte, are black. So when Charlotte questions why she is the one to be chosen, he just points out that he's aware that might be the actual reason. While she's not happy about it, she, just like Adolphus, doesn't have a choice. And a little while later, they arrive in England and they meet with Princess Augusta, who is George's mother. She inspects Charlotte. She gives her approval, but Charlotte shows a little bit of spunk when she fights for her own wedding dress, although that's a battle that she loses. The princess is adamant that Charlotte will wear their own wedding dress because it's more, quote, British. The good news, though, is she passed the test. And she also got a lapdog. His name is Brimsley, who she is shocked to learn will follow her everywhere 5 paces behind, whether she likes it or not. The king, by the way, also has one of these lapdogs. His name is Reynolds. But as Charlotte is getting accustomed to this new kind of lifestyle, the princess goes to meet with some advisors, and while she gave the approval for Charlotte, she's not all that happy. Her main gripe is that Charlotte is, quote, too brown. She actually asks at one point if they can go back on the paperwork, but it's too late. Signed and delivered. What the princess is really worried about is that people will talk. As Adolphus pointed out, this is the first that this is happening. But just as quickly as the princess voices this, she realizes, wait, we're the kingdom. We're the church. We're everything. It's not a big deal unless we make it a big deal. If we tell people this is okay, it's going to be okay. In order to really hammer this point home that Charlotte and her skin color was intentional, they're going to expand the guest list. The issue is the wedding is only in 6 hours, but they're going to send out invitations anyway. And one of those invitations ends up at the home of Agatha Danbury and her much older, yet surprisingly sexually active husband. Even though she's pretty young, she's already had 4 children. So every time they have sex, she has a hot bath, hoping to God that there's not a 5th. She does, however, have a friend that she confides in. It's one of the houseworkers named Coral. Coral knows how Agatha truly feels about her husband. But neither of them expected to be invited to the royal wedding. They show up, and the princess walks over, recognizes Agatha's husband, and says, "Your father was friendly with his late majesty. I'm so pleased you two made it. Lord Danbury." That is the real surprise, because when these two walked into the palace, they weren't lord and lady, but the princess just made it so, reassuring them that the king will send over the paperwork to make it official. Not only that, Agatha is going to appear on the queen's court. So these two made a really good decision to RSVP yes. But there might not be a wedding. Brimsley can't find Charlotte at all. He's getting concerned. And that's probably because as Charlotte was getting dressed, she asked everybody what the king was like, and nobody would give her a straight answer, just telling her that she would be happy and she was going to bear a lot of children. And that probably scared a 17-year-old girl off. But as Brimsley looked all over the place for the queen is actually found by King George. He finds her in the garden, trying to hop over the wall. Although initially, Charlotte doesn't realize that she's talking to the king. And she unwisely explains to him why she's trying to climb over the wall. How she's set to marry what appears to be an ogre because nobody can tell her anything about this guy, so he must be really, really bad. Charlotte, thinking that George is just one of the help at the house, asks over the wall, but he says, "No, I'm not going to help a woman who doesn't want to marry me." And that's when Charlotte realizes that That's George. That's your future husband. And George looks like a poor man's Dave Franco, which is a compliment, a far cry from an ogre. She feels horrible. She starts apologizing, gesturing, but he says, no, don't call me your majesty. Call me George. Just George. This guy is the exact opposite of who she thought he would be. He's extremely down to earth. He seems very nice. And he makes her feel very, very comfortable. He actually jokes around with her that she's too beautiful to marry him because, after all, he's a troll and people would talk. She tries to explain that she's just scared because she doesn't know him, and he says, well, what do you want to know? She says, everything. So he says, okay, I was born prematurely, and everyone thought I was going to die, but I didn't. I'm an okay fencer. I'm an even better shot. My favorite food is mutton. I won't eat fish. It's horrible. I like books, art, and great conversation. Most of all, though, I like science. Chemistry, physics, botany, especially astronomy. I love astronomy. I'm also quite the farmer, and I probably would be a farmer if I wasn't, the king. And I'm also extremely nervous about marrying a girl that I've only just met minutes before our wedding. This conversation gets interrupted by Adolphus, who runs up yelling at Charlotte, we've been looking everywhere to find you, but once he realizes that Charlotte is talking to the king, his mood suddenly changes. Adolphus tries to assure George that Charlotte's very excited, but George says, oh no, she's still making up her mind. She might go over the wall instead, but either way, the choice is entirely up to her. When it comes time, though, to actually go down the aisle, Charlotte decides to do that instead of going over the wall. She marries George. It's a beautiful ceremony. And at the end of it, England has a new queen. They go to the reception, they dance, everybody seems to have a good time. And at the end of the night, they say goodbye to their guests as they're leaving, and Charlotte gets a glimpse at how her life has suddenly changed within a couple of hours. Because Adolphus goes to leave, but they don't say goodbye like a brother and sister normally would. He treats her like the queen, bowing, telling her that he prays that she soon be blessed with children, calling her ma'am. And it's a little bit of a shock to Charlotte because these two were screaming at each other in a carriage a day ago. Charlotte also meets Lady Danbury for the first time, and Danbury introduces herself, telling her, I'm going to be on your court. And Charlotte says, that's great, then we will be great friends. But then Lady Danbury gets close to the queen and says, be careful, ma'am, and know that if you send for me, I shall come. Lady Danbury can't expound on that because her husband calls her to leave. Once everybody is gone, the king and the queen get in their carriage, they head home, and the king tells Charlotte, I've got a present for you. But the present is this giant house, and it looks amazing. He's had it decorated just for her. But her good mood changes when she finds out that he's not planning on staying. She can't quite fathom how she's supposed to stay alone in this house, and he is going to stay at an estate in a place called Kew. She thought this would go like normal wedding nights go. They would spend at least a little bit more time together, sleep in the same room, maybe do some adult stuff. But the king had other plans. They're going to go their separate ways. That's when you get a glimpse at the happy couple's first fight. It's adorable. She's upset because he's blowing her off on their wedding night. He can't figure out what the problem is because he just gifted her this giant house. As he went to leave, she says, George, is this how it's supposed to be? And he says, yeah. This sparks another fight, one that George desperately doesn't want to be in. But the queen demands some answers. She wants to know exactly why he thinks this is a good idea. He finally snaps and just yells, I decide. I have decided I am your king. And Charlotte looks at him and says, oh, my apologies. I thought you were George. Just George. Good night, your majesty. And she leaves. And George feels like an ass for saying that. Unfortunately for Charlotte, she spends her wedding night alone. But that Charlotte is a long way from the confident queen that we know. That queen gets woken up in the middle of the night by her doctor, and she thinks that it's the news of the king being dead, but she finds out no. It's the Princess Royal who died in childbirth, carrying what would be the heir to the throne. This puts the future of the monarchy in question. It's something that Whistledown writes about. How the queen is so good at matchmaking, and yet, even though her and the king have 13 children, they have no heirs to speak of. It's not a good look. So after the funeral, Charlotte meets with all of her children and just yells at them to make her an heir. Now, her sons, they have plenty of children, but they're all illegitimate. No, she needs them to actually marry somebody. Somebody of name recognition, value, and someone who can bring her a baby. Her daughters, they've never been married. Basically, Charlotte and the king have 13 deadbeat kids. So she orders them to hop to it and get her some grandbabies ASAP. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.